Ethan and I had just settled into our new apartment, and I couldn't contain my excitement. This place was our fresh start, a chance to rebuild our lives. Everything seemed perfect. The living room was spacious, with large windows that let in the morning sun, casting light on the trees in the park across the street. The kitchen finally had the space I needed for all my cooking experiments. Ethan was as calm and collected as always, but I could tell his mind was somewhere else, drifting beyond our conversations. I tried not to focus on it too much. Maybe he was just worn out from all the moving. One evening, after we had unpacked the last box, Ethan casually told me that his son from his first marriage, Tyler, would be staying with us for a few months. I was taken aback, unsure of how to respond. A wave of anxiety hit me. I had never met Tyler before. All I knew was that he was 18 and soon heading off to college. I smiled, trying to mask my nervousness, but a voice inside me kept asking, would he like me? How would he see me? Would we get along? When Tyler finally arrived, he didn't look anything like I expected. He was tall and slender, with straight dark hair, tousled as if he had just run his fingers through it. His eyes had a sharp, intense look, making me freeze for a moment. He was polite and formal, but there was something about his smile that made me cautious, as if there was more to him than he let on. Right from the start, I felt like he was hiding his true feelings behind a mask. We had dinner together that night, and Ethan shared stories from his childhood to lighten the mood, but I couldn't stop glancing at Tyler. He sat quietly, watching us like he was observing an experiment. I tried to spot a resemblance between him and Ethan, but I couldn't find one. Only once, when he smiled at his father, did I notice the same small crease at the corner of his mouth that Ethan had. The next morning, while I was making coffee alone in the kitchen, Tyler walked in and greeted me softly. His eyes quickly scanned the room before locking onto mine. I felt myself blush, and to cover my embarrassment, I offered him a cup. He accepted, and we sat at the table chatting about nothing important. But his presence, his every movement, his gaze, everything about him was so strikingly different from what I expected, yet strangely magnetic. I couldn't help but wonder what was going on inside his head. I became curious about who he really was, what lay behind that cold politeness and mysterious smile. Why did he seem so distant yet so observant? It felt like everything I said was being filtered through some invisible barrier. I sensed a quiet tension between us, a line I didn't dare cross. I tried talking to Ethan about how hard it was for me to adjust to everything, but he brushed it off with a reassuring smile. Don't worry, he said. Tyler's a good guy. He'll get used to it. But something inside me told me it wouldn't just be him adjusting. Every day, I felt like something was slipping out of my grasp, like there was an alternate reality in this apartment that I hadn't yet figured out. Weeks went by, and our lives settled into a strange routine. Tyler and I spent more time together. First, it was innocent enough. He would hang around the kitchen while I cooked, asking questions about recipes and sharing his thoughts. Ethan often worked late, and in his absence, I found myself seeking out these brief, sometimes pleasant conversations with Tyler. One evening, when it was already dark, I decided to watch an old movie I'd been wanting to revisit. Ethan was at a meeting again, and I felt a bit lonely in our still unfamiliar home. Tyler appeared at the doorway of the living room and asked if I wanted some company. Why not? I replied, trying to hide my unease. We sat on the couch, keeping a respectful distance, but I could feel his presence as though it filled the entire space. Every glance from him felt like a burn, and every movement seemed to echo in my body. At one point, our hands brushed and I flinched, as if struck by static electricity. He turned to me, his voice soft. Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I laughed nervously, trying to act casual, but there was something about his deep, confident voice that stirred something inside me I couldn't explain. The movie played on, but I couldn't focus on it. Every so often, I'd glance at Tyler. He sat relaxed, but his eyes were alert, as if waiting for something. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Have you ever felt like someone understands you better than you understand yourself?" The question caught me off guard. I don't know, I said, unsure of how to answer. Have you? Sometimes, he replied, leaning in slightly, his eyes locked onto mine. In that moment, everything around us seemed to stop. Time slowed, and the entire world felt like it collapsed into that small space, those few inches between us. And then it happened. Tyler leaned in, his lips brushing mine, as if testing the waters, seeking permission. His kiss was light, almost weightless, like a feather's touch. For a second, I fought against the impulse to give in, but my body already knew what it wanted. I couldn't think straight anymore. My hands reached for him instinctively, and I kissed him back. The moment stretched out, simultaneously eternal and fleeting. I could feel his breath growing quicker, and my heart pounded in my chest. But the kiss itself remained gentle, surreal even. I pulled away, feeling the heat in my cheeks, and found the strength to whisper, "Tyler, this is wrong." He looked at me, his gaze serious but soft. "I know," he said quietly, "but I can't pretend. I can't ignore what I feel." He stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me in a whirlpool of confusion. I watched him go, unsure of what to do next. Outside, the rain hit the window in heavy drops, their rhythmic tapping filling the silence. Alone in the dim light, I felt a stirring inside me that I couldn't understand. It felt like a shift, like a small earthquake that rattled every layer of my being. The next morning, I woke up with the overwhelming sense that everything around me had changed. The room felt unfamiliar, and when I looked into the bathroom mirror, I saw a woman with anxious eyes staring back, someone I barely recognized. The events of the previous evening lingered in my mind, like a hazy dream I wished I could erase, but no matter how hard I tried, it kept creeping back with each passing moment. I made my way to the kitchen, hoping the routine of making coffee would help settle my nerves. Just as I was starting the machine, the door opened and Tyler walked in. He acted as if nothing had happened, as though the kiss from the night before had been some kind of fleeting illusion. He greeted me with that easy smile of his, and I could feel my cheeks warm up. I didn't know how to respond, what to say or do. It was as though we had crossed a line, and now I was left to navigate this new reality. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying a subtle warmth as his eyes lingered on mine just a moment longer than usual. It felt like he knew more than he was letting on, like he understood the turmoil inside me, and was somehow playing with it. I tried to answer, but my voice trembled. Turning away to focus on the coffee, I mumbled, "Good morning." I could feel his presence behind me, thick with tension. The rest of the day blurred by. Ethan had left early for work, and Tyler and I were alone. We tried to go about our day as usual, but there was an unspoken awkwardness between us, like we both knew too much to pretend everything was normal. Tyler avoided looking me in the eye, and I kept my distance, though inside I was torn. Part of me wanted to run far away, but another part of me felt drawn to him, wanting to understand what was really happening between us. Later that morning, Tyler suggested we go up to the roof. "The view up there is incredible," he said. I knew it was a bad idea, but for some reason I agreed. We climbed the stairs and stepped onto a small terrace that offered an amazing view of the city. It was peaceful, the only sound being the soft breeze ruffling my hair, and I could feel my heart rate quicken. Tyler stood next to me, gazing out at the horizon. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said, almost like he was lost in his own thoughts. I nodded, unsure how to respond, unwilling to meet his eyes. Then, out of nowhere, he said my name. "Megan." I felt a jolt inside me. "I can't stop thinking about what happened yesterday," he continued. "I know it was wrong." His voice trailed off as he stared at the distant skyline. "I can't pretend I don't feel something," he added, his words hanging in the air between us. I looked at him, trying to read his expression. "You don't understand what this means to me," I whispered. "I can't risk what I have with Ethan. This is wrong, Tyler." He turned to face me, taking a step closer. "But what if it's the only right thing we have?" His voice was low and earnest. "What if it's what we've both been searching for all along?" I felt my legs weaken. I wanted to run to get away from this feeling, but his words clung to me. We stood there, so close I could hear his breath, the tension between us thickening. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back, stepping away. "Tyler, please," I said, my voice pleading. "We need to stop." "I can't. I'm not asking you to decide right now," he interrupted softly. "I just want you to know this isn't just some game to me." His words left me in silence, unsure of what to think. He seemed so sincere, but something deep inside me told me I was walking straight into a trap, one I had set for myself. A whirlwind of emotions filled me. Fear, guilt, curiosity. Every part of me felt taut, stretched to its limit. We stayed on the roof for a while longer, silently watching the sun dip below the horizon, and I felt a mix of dread and excitement stir within me. After that moment on the roof, I tried to keep my distance from Tyler. I forced myself to act like nothing had changed, to stay composed, but the weight of it all grew harder with each day. Ethan began to notice my growing nervousness, his eyes searching mine for something I was trying so hard to hide. He worked longer hours, coming home late, and strangely I found comfort in this. At least I knew Tyler and I wouldn't be alone. But one evening everything changed. Ethan was supposed to be working late, and I decided to make dinner for Tyler and myself. I rushed through the preparations, trying to keep my mind blank, focusing only on the tasks at hand. Tyler helped me, passing vegetables and carefully chopping them, as though it all held some deeper significance. We barely spoke, and every sound of the knife hitting the cutting board seemed unnervingly loud. Just as dinner was about to be served, the door swung open and I froze. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his eyes cold. He glanced briefly at the table, then at us, and there was something in his gaze that sent a chill down my spine. My world seemed to collapse into that single moment, and I couldn't breathe. "What's going on?" he asked softly, as if he already knew. I felt a sharp, icy fear spread through me. Tyler opened his mouth to speak, but I stopped him with a quick gesture. "Ethan, it's not what you think," I said, my voice faltering. He raised his hand, cutting me off. "You think I haven't noticed?" he asked with a bitter smile. "Do you think I haven't seen the way you look at him, the way you talk to him?" I stayed silent, my lips dry, unable to find the words. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wanted to shout, to explain, but all that came out were shallow breaths. My hands were shaking. "Ethan," Tyler spoke up, his voice steady. No," Ethan interrupted, his tone sharp. "I don't want to hear excuses." He turned to me, and his eyes held so much pain that it felt like a physical blow. "I trusted you, Megan," he said, his voice trembling despite his attempt to stay strong. "I thought we could start over." That moment shattered everything. I felt like the ground beneath me was vanishing. I tried to step forward, but Ethan stepped back, his face tight with emotion. "Please, Ethan. I don't—" My voice cracked, but he cut me off. "I don't want to hear it anymore," he said, his voice hoarse, filled with finality. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing in the silence that followed. I glanced at Tyler. His face was calm, but his eyes held something that made me feel deep down that this whole situation had been a mistake from the very beginning. "I have to go," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "This is wrong. I shouldn't have." "No," I interrupted, finally realizing the weight of what had happened. "Ethan's right. This was a mistake. I should have never let this happen." Tyler nodded, his voice laced with bitterness. "I know," he replied, "but it's too late now." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. My thoughts were swirling, but none of them seemed right. It felt like I was caught in the middle of a storm, one that was threatening to tear everything apart. Tyler turned and slowly walked out, leaving me alone in the now empty kitchen. The rain was pouring outside, its rhythmic tapping against the window only emphasizing the emptiness that had settled in my chest. After that night, the house seemed to fall into an eerie silence. Ethan didn't return, and I had no idea where he had gone. Tyler also disappeared, leaving me in this quiet, oppressive space. Every step I took through the house felt like an echo of all the unspoken words and unresolved feelings. I tried to fill the silence by doing mundane tasks, washing clothes that were already clean, scrubbing dishes that didn't need washing, but none of it worked. My mind couldn't stop replaying the events, and I couldn't find peace. The next day I got a brief message from Ethan. "We need time. I won't be back anytime soon." There was no doubt in his words. It was clear what he meant. We were over. I understood that he needed space, perhaps to find himself or maybe to avoid me. Either way, every time I read those words, it felt like something inside me was slowly crumbling. Later that evening there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Tyler standing there, looking tired and uneasy. His eyes were serious, but there was something in them that told me he understood the weight of everything that had happened. "Megan," he began softly, "I came to say goodbye." I felt my lips go dry, and for a moment I couldn't find the words. I just stood there trying to read his face, trying to understand what he wasn't saying. He reached for my hand, his touch warm yet distant, as if he had already made his decision. "I'm leaving," he said, locking eyes with me. "I can't stay here. This is wrong. All of it." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I understand," I whispered, even though I didn't understand anything. Inside, I was a whirlwind of pain, regret, and confusion. We stood there in the hallway, and it felt like the whole world was shrinking around us. The silence stretched, and I felt a magnetic pull towards him, knowing that if I didn't say something now, I would lose this moment forever. "Tyler," I started, but he interrupted me. "Don't," he said gently, raising a hand. "You were right, Megan. This was a mistake. But I don't regret meeting you." My heart ached at his words. He stepped closer, his face inches from mine. "Just one last time," he whispered, and his lips found mine. This kiss was different from the first. It was heavy with sorrow, with the understanding that we had lost everything. It was a kiss of goodbye, deep, full of pain and regret, but also a strange sort of forgiveness. In that one moment, we seemed to be searching for answers, for something that would make sense of everything. When we finally pulled away, I saw the tears in his eyes. "Goodbye, Megan," he said softly, before turning and walking out of my life. I watched him leave, and something inside me tore apart. I closed the door behind me, feeling the emptiness creep into every part of my being. The next day, I received a notification from Ethan about the divorce. I knew in that instant that everything between us was broken beyond repair. There was no fixing it. Tyler had left without a word, without leaving any trace of where he had gone, and I realized that he had disappeared as quickly as he had entered my life. All that was left was bitterness and the awful truth. I had been walking on thin ice, and now it had cracked beneath me. Left alone, I tried to move on, to start over. But each day only reminded me of what I had lost. Now there was more silence than sound in my life, more emptiness than warmth. I wandered through the vacant apartment, trying to find something to give me purpose, but it all seemed pointless. I knew that I would have to learn to live with the consequences of my choices, live with the reality that I had destroyed everything I held dear. Sometimes I dreamed of going back and doing it all differently, but I knew that wasn't possible. All I could do now was accept my mistakes and hope, somehow, that in the distant future, I might find forgiveness. Though deep down I knew that forgiveness might never come.